I love Sunday mornings, and I find great satisfaction in leading Sunday worship, singing the hymns, listening to the scriptures, offering up the prayers. These are all things which stir my heart. And I love to preach. It is such a pleasure to stand in this pulpit and share my understandings of the morning's text. But by the end of the third service, I'm usually pretty wrung out. And so over the years, I've also grown to love Sunday afternoon. Usually when I go home around 1 o'clock or so, Linda and I will share a bit of lunch and often do what our late friend Doug Dietrich used to call a post-mortem. We talk about how the sermon went, who had good news to share, who told us of an upcoming hospitalization. Late in the day, I'll make a call to my mother in Kentucky for our weekly chat. But in between that, for most of the afternoon, you'll find me stretched out on the couch, reading not one but 2 Sunday papers. Like most people, I imagine, I don't read everything in every section. But there are certain columns that I make sure to read every week. And one of those is the one written by Dan Warner in the News Press. Dan, if you don't know, is a retired editor. For some 27 years, he guided the Eagle Tribune in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Lawrence, if you're not from the Northeast, you may not know this, is an old mill town on the Merrimack River. It's seen better days. But Dan still managed to lead the paper, emphasizing factual reporting, which took into consideration the human perspective. He often gave voice to the voiceless, and in 1998 led the paper to a Pulitzer Prize for news reporting. Led them with a hard-hitting series on the Massachusetts prison furlough program. When Dan left the Eagle Tribune, he and his wife Janet moved to Lee County, where he served as a writer and on the editorial board of the News Press. In recent years, more fully retired now, he focuses on his weekly column. This past Sunday, he reflected on the year that is now coming to a close, 2013. He notes his pleasure in seeing the Christmas decorations going up. There has been far too much time, he writes, far too much time between Christmas and Christmas. The year 2013, he says, has been undecidedly un-Christmassy, devoid of goodwill to men and thoughts of loving one another. From there, he goes on to list some of the many difficulties and challenges that we've faced in this past year. Government shutdown, weather-related disasters seemingly every single week of the year, horrible, unresolvable wars in places like Syria. And he doesn't even mention the school shootings. I'm told there have been 26 since Newtown, including one more just this week. He doesn't mention the fact that despite things getting better, far too many people are still out of work. He doesn't talk about the struggles that took place this year and are still going on over health care. He's right. In many ways, 2013 has been a tough year. And not just on the global front. I speak to folks every single week who seem to be barely holding on. Health problems, one right after another. Jobs lost, marriages crumbling, adult children with drug problems or going through divorce. Some days, and a cloudy day like this only makes it seem worse, some days are pretty bleak, even on beautiful Sanibel. And when that happens, we can't help but ask, what are we to do? It's hard enough making it from day to day. How can we possibly have energy left over to deal with the larger issues? It's the same dilemma that was faced by those ancient Jews in our reading from Isaiah. Back in 589 BCE, their country was taken over by the Babylonians. Jerusalem was ransacked, its walls demolished, the temple destroyed, homes burned. Thousands upon thousands were forcibly marched across the desert to live in exile, hundreds of miles from home. For 2 generations, they long to go back. When finally, in 538, there's a shift on the international scene. A new power, Persia, comes to the fore, and its king allows the Jews to return. They begin to trekkle and trickle across the desert. But what they find when they get to Jerusalem is the remnants of what had once been a great city. Jerusalem is in ruins. When they left Babylon, they had thought they were leaving their troubles behind. But much, much work, decades worth of work, lay ahead of them. They can hardly muster the energy to plant their own crops. They can hardly muster enough energy to rebuild their own homes, much less address the need to rebuild the entire infrastructure. How will we ever do it, they wonder. How can we move on? How can we rise out of the ashes of grief and despair to regain our dignity and our lives? It is into this setting that the prophet injects his powerful words. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the oppressed and the brokenhearted. Take comfort, he says, take comfort in the knowledge that God will restore the nation. You will build up the ancient ruins. You will repair the ruined cities. Your descendants shall be known among the nations, and your offspring among the peoples. It may look hopeless, says the prophet. It may seem bleak. The problems may just seem to keep on coming, but rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord. Exult in God. Easy for him to say, you may be thinking. After all, he's a prophet. But remember, this prophet faces the exact same devastation and destruction as those around him. Most likely his own family home has been destroyed. Most likely he lost loved ones while they were in exile in Babylon. Most likely some may have gotten sick or died on the return trip 800 miles through the blazing desert. Yet he still says, I will rejoice. What the prophet recognizes that those around him have failed to see is that even in the midst of great tragedy, one can experience real and lasting joy. For joy is found in God. A fact we celebrate on this third Sunday in Advent. For Christmas, you see, Christmas, more than any other day of the year, that day we prepare for in this season, Christmas reminds us that God is here, right here, in the midst of the messiness of life, right here in the everyday, festival day, fast day, or plain ordinary Tuesday. God is present, and true joy can be found wherever God can be found. It can be experienced. And sometimes all we need is for a prophet to point us in the right direction. The thing about prophets, you see, is we can believe them, for they are honest. They don't sugarcoat things. They don't say, there, everything's all right. Don't worry, be happy. Rather, they tell it like it is. Yes, they may say, things are really messed up in the world. Yes, there are folks who are hungry, lots of them. Yes, there are homeless men and women, and by God, even children on the streets. Yes, there are vicious wars in places like Syria and Afghanistan. Yes, families often struggle to keep it together, and sometimes they fail to do so. Things aren't the way they should be. But, says the prophet, don't let that stop you. Don't let it stop you from working to make things better. Don't let that bog you down in despair, because God is here. And as we allow ourselves to be open to God's love, so we can share that love with others and begin to turn things around. For joy is real. Prophets, of course, come in many guises. Sometimes they are the people we least expect to be harbingers of glad tidings and great joy. Despite our cynicism about the media, sometimes prophets are even journalists. Dan Warner, I think, is a case in point. He would probably demur at the suggestion he's a prophet, but in that weekly column, he often highlights things that are out of whack, things that just aren't working right. He's no cockeyed optimist. But Dan also recognizes and celebrates joy when he sees it, just like old Isaiah did centuries ago in the midst of the ruins of Jerusalem. After going through that mind-boggling list of things that had gone awry in 2013, Dan writes, "Enough of the gloom. Time to turn our backs on the doom. The Christmas decorations are up." And then, very wisely, he proceeds to describe a wide array of things that be done to brighten the world in this season of the year, things that you and I can do, like reading to children, for instance, especially things like The Gift of the Magi or Dickens' A Christmas Carol, books that speak of the possibility of men and women being transformed by love. You can fix a food basket, he says, for those who are hungry. Go to church and worship a loving and merciful God. And you can sing You can always sing the silly songs of the season like Rudolph and Frosty, but also the carols and hymns that remind us, if we really pay attention, to deep and profound truths. In other words, in both word and deed, you and I can be prophets. We too can point out that even in the midst of darkness there is light. Even in the constant barrage of doom and gloom that's only a computer click away, even in the midst of that, one can find love. One can find faith. One can find hope. Even in the midst of all the things that seem to be going wrong, we can find that which is right and good and true. As a congregation, as individuals, we can say that. We can show that in all that we do in this Advent season, in this Christmas time of year. We can send hats to cold kids up north and provide gifts for needy children right here in Lee County. We can open our doors to little children and their parents, providing a safe and solid start to young lives in our preschool. We can share our space, as we do all week long, with those who are in recovery from addiction. We can partner with our Jewish brothers and sisters and demonstrate that despite what the world says, people of different religious beliefs and faiths can get along, can work together, can even live together under the same roof. We can share the beauty of poinsettias with those who are shut in. We can bring food for the pantries. We can offer words of comfort to grieving friends. We can visit the sick. We, you and I, we can be prophets. We can point to God's presence in what we say and what we do. We can share the joy. We can share the good news. That, concludes Warner in his article, that is our task and our privilege, to bring as much joy as we can to the part of the world that surrounds us. For the children, for generations to come, and for ourselves who need it most. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, proclaims Isaiah. My whole being shall exalt my God. This Advent, this Christmas, might you and I do the same. Might we be prophets of joy. Amen. You may have always thought, sisters and brothers, that a prophet had to have a long, bushy beard. But I'm here this morning to tell you that's not true. That ain't the way it is. You can be a prophet. You can be a prophet. Clean-shaven or not, male or female, young or old, you can be a prophet, and in this season, especially, as the light dims and we grow closer and closer to that dark time of the year, you can be a prophet of joy. Might you go from this place and proclaim it loudly. Might you share the good news in what you do and in what you say. For if there is anything that this, as Dickens said, this tired old world of ours needs, it is more and more prophets of joy.